Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
Thanks, Brad. As a business and healthcare law firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. In today's episode, we're going to spend some time with some of our friends, Stephen Holley and Clint Bruce.
Yeah, and today I thought we could share with our audience before we bring in our guests. We have spent a lot of time with this organization, energy-wise, financial-wise, law firm-wise, and it's been a lot of fun. But before we jump in today's episode, throughout the last 4 seasons of this podcast, we've been slowly sharing some more personal information with our audience.
Yeah, it's been a real struggle for you to share, Brad.
Yes, I'm very quiet. So something our audience might not know is both of us have spent many weekends on campouts with our kids at the YMCA Adventure Guides program.
Yes, we have 1 year of overlap. My kids were older, and so I got through the program and was just finishing up when you started it now many years ago.
Yeah, and so my first camp out ever, it was a decade ago, about this time. I met one of our guests today and learned about an organization that he had started with a college friend.
Brad, I think you need to give a little bit more detail to our audience other than just college friend.
Okay, well, it is true. They are college friends, although the college is the United States Naval Academy, where they both played football for Navy, graduated, and then they went on to serve on something called the Navy SEALs.
Okay, well, there's our first vocabulary word for the day. But hopefully they've heard our prior episodes and know. But for those who don't know from last time, we'd had a SEAL on in season 2. SEAL stands for Navy's SEAL, Sea, Air, Land Teams.
That's right. So thanks for the clarification for our audience who hadn't heard it. So on this campout, I spent some time with one of our guests and learned about this nonprofit that he had started with another fellow SEAL, and it captured our attention and many others. And so we're super excited and grateful that they decided to stop by our show today. Can you bring on our guests, Michael?
Yeah, so we're going to have Stephen and Clint, and I can't wait to hear their stories and hear about Carry the Load. Both are from Dallas, but served in the U.S. Navy on SEAL Team 5, where they completed multiple deployments overseas. They are the co-founders of Carry the Load. Clint and his wife Amy have 3 daughters and live in Dallas. When he's not helping with nonprofit boards he's part of, he is a serial entrepreneur with several companies, including TRG, Holdfast, and Wendy J. Clint has mentioned that his daughters are not impressed that he played football, drafted by the Saints, or was a Navy SEAL. Stephen and his wife Molly have 5 active children. When he's not coaching the kids and helping with the nonprofit, Stephen's an active real estate commercial broker and a longtime client of the firm.
Gentlemen, welcome.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We're, again, thankful that you guys could stop by. But Clint, we're coming up this weekend. We'll be celebrating the 10th anniversary of Carry the Load, which is crazy to think about. And, we are going to be excited to talk with our audience about Carry the Load. But, again, we want to give a little more background on the 2 founders. So can you first please share with our audience about what made you want to join the military and become a Navy SEAL?
Yeah. It's interesting. It's probably one of the questions I get asked most often is like, hey, when did you want to become a Navy SEAL? And for a long time, I just kind of don't remember not wanting to be one. But I couldn't ever point to like the genesis of when it was until really just recently, with the COVID and quarantine and all this other stuff. There's no silver lining to this. It's tragic and it's horrible and all these other things. But the one thing that has been a blessing is the unprecedented amount of time probably most of us have spent with our families. And I remember when we were kind of everybody said how my daughter came up to me, and my oldest, I have 3 daughters. My oldest said, "Hey, Dad, do you want to watch Magnum PI?" I'm like, "Absolutely, I'd love to." And she put on the new one. I'm like, all stop. We're not watching that. Like, that doesn't exist to me. It's dead to me. So I took her all the way back to 1980. And we started watching the original Magnum P.I., which is actually a pretty forward-thinking show. It was really one of the first shows that positively represented Vietnam veterans. It's one of the very first shows that really took on racism and took on the relationship that the characters had with each other and their dependency on each other. It's really pretty progressive show. But there was a scene I think it's in the second season, where it kind of reveals that the lead character, Thomas Magnum, had played football at the Naval Academy and become a Navy SEAL. And all of a sudden I had this like super lucid memory of me growing up in Little Rock, Arkansas, watching Magnum P.I. on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. with my dad. And I just had this hyper clear memory of when they revealed that. I remember turning to look at my dad and saying, "Hey, Dad, I want to play football at the Naval Academy and be a Navy SEAL." And my dad looked at me and was like, "All right." And like it was massively influenced by popular culture. And I just never didn't know what I wanted to do. And there were things that kind of eclipsed that and some of these other things. But this desire to serve was really informed at a very early age. Playing football at a great high school, South Carolina High School, back then was given opportunities to maybe play at other schools as well. But my father passed away my senior year, and as the oldest son, just knowing I needed to take care of my family, and I knew the service academies just kind of made a reality available that other schools could only hope to promise. And I just kind of remember, now I remember, hey, I told my dad I was going to do this, so. And I'd always loved the Army-Navy game. The Army-Navy game was just this really, really powerful game for me. I remember I got interviewed one time about the Army-Navy game, and they were asking just about rivalries and all the sports. And I said, well, tell me what y'all think. And they talked about, Texas OU and all these others. And these are great games. I said, listen, I love these games, but Army-Navy stands apart. And they go, why? And I said, well, you show me another game where everyone playing is willing to die for everybody watching, and I'll tell you that we have company. And I just always wanted to be a part of something like that. Mm-hmm. And I remember telling my coach, it's like, hey, I want to be a Navy SEAL. That was recruiting. And he was like, yeah, you just tell him. You just tell me I'm going to be a Navy SEAL. And that's incorrect. That is not true. It's harder than that. And so I never knew I could go to the Naval Academy and become a SEAL, but I was very fortunate to just kind of lean forward into that space and find myself, surrounded by these amazing men that, Stephen and I call teammates, both in the Navy Football Brotherhood and then in the SEAL teams after that. So it just always seemed, it's what I told my dad I'd do when I was really young.
That's amazing. I will have to admit, I did not predict we'd be talking about Tom Selleck today, but
well, it's always right to talk about Tom Selleck.
Of course.
Yeah. So the last part of that story is not particularly a great part of the story. Is when Maddie and I were watching that, my middle daughter comes in and said, hey, Dad, when did you look like that? And Amy, my bride, was in the kitchen. She shouts, unsolicited. No one invited her in this conversation. And she said, your father's never looked like that. Which I thought was pretty hurtful. Not that it's not true. I just didn't want to be reminded of it.
All right, Stephen, let's hear your story about how you came to want to become a SEAL.
Well, it all started at a young age watching the 8s. In season 2. No, in all seriousness, I had 2 grandfathers that both served in World War II. One of which landed on Normandy on D-Day and fought all the way to the Battle of the Bulge. I had a brother-in-law that graduated the Naval Academy when I was in 8th grade and married my sister. So I always had an awareness, but it really wasn't until I went and visited the Naval Academy on a football recruiting trip. And actually, that's where I met Clint the first time. And, at the time, I thought it was a real long shot, but I'll never forget getting back on the plane, coming home on a Sunday, and really taking it all in. I just thought to myself, there's really no better opportunity to go play football, to get a phenomenal education, and to have to have the opportunity to lead men and women ultimately, and have an experience in the military that money can't buy. And all that kind of flashed through my head as an 18-year-old kid, and I thought, all right, I can't turn it down. And that's when the decision was made, and ultimately when I got to the academy, going back to my brother-in-law, he was stationed on Coronado as a surface warfare officer, had several good friends that were SEALs. Once I got there, it was always in the back of my head of what I wanted to do, and lucky enough was able to get a spot to go to Bud. So that's the nutshell of how all that came about.
Well, just to add to that, I don't think Stephen knows this, but the two guys that Stephen visited with, a guy named Ben Fay and then myself, we were both pulled aside by the coaches, being Dallas-Fort Worth kids, and they were like, "Hey, listen, this is probably one of our top recruits, and we want to, So Stephen we really wanted him at Navy, and so it's fun to hear him talk about, hey, I think I got a chance. Well, I'm here on the other side with the staff going, hey, we'd really like to get this kid here. So it's fun to have that kind of thread of continuity between our stories.
That's awesome. Well, as Michael referenced, we did have a SEAL that you both know very well, Birdman, on a while back. So he did give us a good explanation of what Buds was like for him. But one of the things he did share that on the fun side of the SEAL's life was how his first call sign, what it started off was, and then eventually what it became. So, for our audience, would you feel free to share either your original call sign and then eventually your call sign when you left the SEALs?
We're more of nicknames than call signs, and I think we iterated through most of them. Like the one that kind of landed on me was Silverback, and I mean physical similarities are probably influential in that. But there was also a minor incident with some monkeys in the Philippines, and here's what I'll tell you: like when they say don't stare,
which is one of the funniest stories you'll ever hear. I don't know what
I don't want to talk about it anymore. Well, I'll tell you, like, hey, don't stare at the monkeys isn't a metaphor. Like, it's like, don't. Like, any one monkey's not a problem. It's just when all of them, it can get sporty. So yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the one that kind of, and I also don't ever really get mad until I do. And then when I do, it's just like a spectacular fit of rage. Now I just go sit down because anger is cardio. I'm not going to do cardio. So that's the nickname that I found myself hearing the most.
Yeah, and for our audience that's never seen or met Clint, he's a big man, played linebacker for the Naval Academy, was drafted by my Saints a million years ago. So big guy, and so that's a good title for you. Mr. Holley, what was your nickname, as Clint says it?
I kind of ran through a few of them. I'm trying to think of the podcast appropriate one.
I used to call you Sunshine when you first joined our platoon.
Yeah, there was Sunshine, there was Hollywood, there was Steve-O. There was a few of them that I kind of rotated through based on the group of guys that I was serving with.
Hollywood. Now I like that one because for those who have not met Mr. Holley, he's a good-looking boy, Navy quarterback. So maybe he could have played that Magnum PI guy.
He's all right.
Oh man. Well,
he's got a good personality. He's got a good personality.
Yes, he's got a good personality.
Let's hear and learn the story about Carry the Load. And I'd love, I guess, Clint, you go first. Tell me what made you want to start Carry the Load.
Yeah, I mean, like I when people say I started Carry the Load, I tend to say like, hey, I started walking on Memorial Day. That's what I did. But what Carry the Load is now is so far beyond the design or idea of certainly me, and I think maybe any one person. It's very much a collective. But for me, it started really kind of my carrying the load started really after Red Wings, after we lost a bunch of friends in Afghanistan. Everyone knows that story with Marcus. And I just remember that following Memorial Day, we're at these great friends' houses. And for me, when I use the word civilian, it's a kind of a neutral term. When I say citizen, that's a complimentary term. Like civilian is someone who just doesn't generally mess up. a citizen is someone who takes this gift that being an American citizen is and does something with it in their community, in their neighborhood, in their own family. They just do more than they have to for people they don't know. And these people were wonderful citizens. They'd never served, but they were amazing citizens and really dear friends. And I just was not there. I mean, I was in their backyard and we were having a party, and I wanted to be anywhere else but there, but I didn't know where I wanted to be. And my bride came up to me and she kind of pulled me aside. She said, "Hey, you're scaring everybody." I'm like, "I'm not scaring everybody." And she kind of showed me a picture, and I'm a bigger guy and I had my glasses on, and I was like, "All right, maybe a little bit." And she pulled me to the side of the house and she said, "Hey, I love you, and I know you hate this." And she didn't gesture to anyone. She gestured to kind of the weekend. And then she said, "I've never known you to not do something about the things you disagree with, so do something or get over it." And so I went and put a pound for every person I'd lost in a backpack, and I just started walking. And I was around White Rock Lake, and it was super hot. And I remember it was pretty busy. And I remember coming around the corner, and there was a World War II gentleman, and that, you know, I think the world loves that generation. And I was going to say something to him as I got closer to him, but he said something to me first. I pulled my headphones out, and I turned and I looked at him. And he said, "Son," and I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Who are you carrying?" And it just floored me. I mean, it just kind of took my breath away. And because he had kind of articulated that ache, he had kind of put to words what I was feeling. And I've always felt like I need to be around people who get what I don't know how to say until I figure it out, or I don't have to say it. And he did that in that moment. And so that just became a thing that I did on Memorial Day. And I remember sharing that with Stephen and a few other people. And I knew Stephen would want to do something like that too, because, you know, we both had this kind of same pain and anger and frustration. What was so amazing to me was to see men and women, you know, like you that hadn't served, that were just like, "Hey, I want to do something. Like, I need you to know that your friend mattered to me." Because the calculus is kind of this, like, my friends thought people were dying for, even though they didn't know them. And when the people who they died for don't remember them on the one day they're supposed to, it makes them dying for them not make sense to me, and I need it to make sense to me. And so for me, it was amazing, just really out of the healing started for me in that very first year, when it wasn't nearly what it is right now. It was just a bunch of, you know, it was almost 1,000 people, and like 200 of them were related to Stephen that wanted to remember their family members. Like I just remember, Stephen, your family member that had boots around his neck the whole time, and, you know, Jimmy was there with all his kids, and for me, like the wound started kind of closing in, and every year it's just incrementally gone. So Carry the Load really started because a bunch of people said, "Hey, I want to do something too," and I think Stephen's and my maybe greatest gift was listening to other people telling us how they wanted to do it. And just kind of being a part of that whole thing. And then obviously as it kind of grew, and it's really amazing now to watch Stephen, Debbie, and Todd and everybody's leadership now kind of making it what it is. It's kind of this thing that becomes everybody's version of saying thank you. And it's really special. So I just started walking. Everyone else has made it Carry the Load.
It's well said. Stephen?
Oh my gosh, something just fell in my office. Excuse me. I would tell you that my first memory of it, I remember Clint sharing that experience, but I also remember Clint wrote like a white paper on it. And I think to piggyback on what he said, I think after that guy had articulated what some of those emotions that Clint was dealing with, that triggered a kind of a flood of emotions onto a piece of paper, and it was a white paper on what this could be and why. And it really it struck a nerve with me, obviously, because you know, a lot of the same folks that he was remembering I had known as well. And I just saw this vision around what this event could be, and there was a lot of emotion around it. And anyway, that was my first memory of it, and I remember reading it. And I think it was in my sister's kitchen when I got the email or the text from Clint and read that. And so we started gathering with a group of people shortly thereafter, a handful of people, and started socializing what this event could be. And one thing led to another, and here we are, going into our 10th anniversary, and we're coming up on $30 million raised, and dozens and dozens of nonprofits across the country that we've supported, and all the while raising awareness around Memorial Day and the men and women who've made the ultimate sacrifice. So I don't think in our wildest dreams, going back to Clint's experience or my initial experience with it, we could have envisioned where we are. But we're where we are because of people that came alongside us that really cared, more often than not, that didn't have any military experience, and who understood what we were trying to do and made the mission their own.
I'll give you an example of how Steve and I so freely say this wasn't our idea. Because I remember when Steve and I were figuring out what to do, he was like, let's run for 20 hours. So here's what we knew. We knew we wanted to do something for 20 hours to 10 minutes. And then Steve was like, let's run. I'm like, well, we got to talk, and I can't talk and run. Like, you can talk and run. I can't talk and run. So you run if you want to, but I'm walking, right? And then we had this kind of vision, what it is. And I remember Rebecca Harsley just being like, I'm not coming to that. Like, what do y'all want to do? Is this about y'all, or is this about being inclusive and letting people come do activities? And I was just like, well, her idea is really good. Like, maybe let's do what she said. So it really has. And then when Rena Morris tells you to do something, I was just so dang scared of her that I was like, all right, whatever Rena said, right? And but it really has. That first year was a White Rock Lake, and then Stephen and Rebecca were like, hey, let's go to Reverchon, and I was really resistant to that. And then that very first year, when I saw the brilliance of it, and Rorman's talked about this on the podcast that Todd does, like that first year, there was a windstorm, it was a 9-mile loop, watching Josh walk backwards and Jeff Staubach and all these guys kind of guide him, and just, it was just really kind of this intense thing, but you don't pass each other. And that was the brilliance of Reverchon that I failed to see until that first time, is there's this energy, and if the purpose was to raise connection and increase awareness, then connectivity and interaction is part of that. And the first time we were on that Katy Trail, and you see someone coming towards you, and you're coming to them, it was a piece of magic that, that, like, not only was it not my idea, I was resisting. And so it really much is, it's everybody's got a piece of this thing.
That's awesome.
That's amazing. Well, share for the audience the Carry the Load's mission.
The mission statement is, Carry the Load's a nonprofit that provides an active way to connect Americans to the sacrifices made daily by our military, our veterans, our first responders, and their families. And we do that through our awareness events, which are flagship events in Dallas. We've got 4 national relays that span the entire country that happen during the month of May. We've got our nonprofit partners that are part of our, part of the, what I call the continuum of care, that support those constituents, military, veteran, law enforcement, fire and rescue, and their families in some way, shape, or form across a broad spectrum. And then our third component, we've got an educational component that has sprang out of doing a lot of speaking in different schools. And, for me personally, having a couple of young kids at our first event, that was 5 now. That was 3 kids ago, and they were very young. But I think they were 4 and 6.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they didn't understand what was going on. But as we did it year after year, and seeing some of the stories and the pictures, I started getting very mature questions from young children. And so, in educating them, we started speaking to schools, and so one thing led to another. We now have an educational arm called Carry the Flag, and Carry the Flag is essentially a curriculum around patriotism and service and sacrifice and what that means. And it's an off-the-shelf curriculum that we send to schools across the country, and a program that continues to grow that we're very excited about. So
That's amazing. And, you already referenced the fact that Carry the Load for these nonprofits y'all are working at has already raised $30 million over 10 years, which is, for a young nonprofit, it's just incredible. So hat tip to you guys in that piece. And, when it comes to fundraising, as you said, the very first event was, for those not familiar with Dallas, was a lake basically that y'all walked around. And after that, it was a trail that people could go back and forth. But all of a sudden, y'all decide, we need to find another way to impact Memorial Day. And so what made you all of a sudden say, hey, let's go take this to nationally?
Well, that was really the very first relay. There was a gentleman named Jack First. Jack is incredibly involved in Boy Scouts. And, I think he just showed up at the first Carry the Load because it was, felt like something he should do. And then to hear him tell, it's pretty remarkable. And I remember Scott Rohrman, after the very first Carry the Load, said, hey, you got to talk to Jack First. And I mean, this is, I think only, if memory serves, it was only a few hours after we got done. And I've listened to just how profoundly that affected Jack and his desire to kind of help us take that national. And he goes, hey, I got to introduce you to this guy named Bill Driscoll. And I think, every once in a while you get like remember we were growing up, there was like lawn darts and it had a little warning label on it, like, hey, it's a toy, but at the same time, so you just casually lobbed out like, hey, I need you to meet Bill Driscoll, as though Bill's just any other human being on the planet. Bill is not any other human being on the planet. Bill is nuclear energy encapsulated in a small man. I mean, he's just full of throttle. And Bill has this amazing genius of, one, just capturing vision, and then two, action on that vision. And he had a history of doing the Olympic torch relays and some of these other things. And so it was really this kind of meeting in our office afterwards saying, he goes, Clint, what do you want to do? I said, I want to change the way the nation does Memorial Day. And then it was just kind of this collective with really Bill and Scott and Jack envisioning something beyond the scope of certainly I had thought of, and Stephen may have been there before me. I don't know, but it really, again, that's why it's so fun to say, hey, it's everyone's idea. And I remember that first relay. I said, hey, we can step off of the cemetery of West Point and walk down the East Coast, because that's where I knew a lot of people, and I knew a lot of people on the East Coast, and I wanted to walk through there on Memorial Day and show these people that their son and daughter, father, mother, sister, brother, friend wasn't going to be forgotten. And so that very first, I know we have this thing we call it ground force commanders, like, hey, you got to have someone on deck making it happen. And the other piece that I think really made that realistic was the availability of a guy named Coleman Ruiz. And Coleman has looked like a 42-year-old Tommy Lee Jones since he was 17. And Coleman's going to look like a 42-year-old Tommy Lee Jones when he's 90. He's just one of the hardest human beings I know. And his wife, Bridget's amazing. And Coleman was between Stephen and I. So Coleman was a year behind me. And he's a highly decorated Navy SEAL leader, amazing collegiate wrestler. And he was just transitioning. And Jack was generous enough to kind of fund this initial foray into this relay. And I knew Coleman didn't know what he wanted to do yet. So for me, it seemed like this perfect match. With the availability of a mind like Bill and this incredible college called ABAC, Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College. And it was just like this perfect storm of talent and tenacity and desire. And I think once we did that first relay, it was so encouraging to us to create this concept called the Memorial May National Relay that culminates in the Memorial Day March. And I think once we did it once, we just didn't want to not do it. I mean, it was a way for us to go to where the hurt was and walk alongside people that miss their people. And Stephen, people ask me what my favorite stories from the relay are, and one of my favorite stories is your story of just walking through Memphis and the disgruntled construction foreman who and then prior I think there's a magic that powered the mission that we just never wanted to lose. And because of that, it's turned into this kind of rally and relay thing that Stephen and the team have spearheaded that is just so incredible.
Stephen, can you share that story with our audience?
Yeah, so this was actually, so I've got tons of relay stories. There's a lot of great memories of year one when we were up on a Cruise America RV.
Yeah, I was surprised they let us turn that RV back in, frankly. I was just like, hey, we need to be ready to eat the cost of this RV because I'm pretty sure it may not. We had no idea what we were doing.
We had no idea what we were doing, and it was Dill and Coleman and a medic and a driver just kind of winging it, making it up as they went. And Clint and I and others would kind of come on and off legs, different parts of the country when they needed assistance or they needed, anyway. There's a lot of crazy stories from year one, but the story that Clint referenced, I think it was year two. It was 2013, year two of the National Relay, and I had flown to Memphis. We'd driven a couple hours, and we'd met the team.
Because Coleman and them were stuck in so the first time you're too dumb to know it. You don't know how hard it's gonna be, so you just kind of power through the next time. So the next time they're like, "Hey, we're in, and we know what it's like for the next 7 hours." And Coleman was like, "Hey, Steven, we need some help, man." And you mentioned that to Pryor, right? Yeah,
and so year one, Pryor and I, flew out there at last minute and walked for a couple of days. Well, the experience was so powerful for Pryor that year two, he said, "I'm going back again." So we flew to Memphis and joined up and, walked off and on through the night. And the next day we got into Memphis proper, walked on and off all day. And we were kind of getting into down leg that would take us kind of down through into downtown there on the river. And I'll never forget, we'd been walking most of the afternoon. And I think it was the 4 o'clock leg, I believe, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We got to a fire station. And my plan was to get on the bus and to take a break for 2 hours and meet him at the next leg. Well, we're all of a sudden we had a last minute sign up on someone's going to walk this leg. Well, all of a sudden this young kid and his mom walked on the bus. And I say this young kid, he was probably 8 or 10 years old, and he had on an army uniform cap, and they turned out to be involved with Snowball Express, which was one of our nonprofit partners early on. And so, we said, how'd you hear about us? They said, we're involved with Snowball. Buck Kern told us we should come out and meet you guys. And she said, ultimately, my husband, this young man's father, was killed in Iraq. And I just want my son to know that there's people out there, there's groups out there that are remembering, their father in that service and sacrifice. And I want my son to be a part of this. And Pryor and I kind of looked at each other and we said, all right, we're walking another 5 miles, another 2 hours. And so we get out, we start walking with them, and we're talking, we're learning more of their story. And in that year, we had a police escort in the front, a police escort in the back, and we had a fire truck on either end. It was quite the spectacle coming down the street. And as we're coming down the street, I can see up ahead, we're going to go through a construction zone. And so I see this big old foreman kind of lean out in the street thinking, what is going on here? And so, kind of the running joke on the relay was when people see you walking and you're in the middle of nowhere in Tennessee and they say, hey, where are you going? And you're walking with an American flag and a carry the load flag. Hey, where are you going? You always say, hey, we're walking to Dallas. And they always think you're kidding. And you say, no, we're really walking to Dallas, and here's why. And you give them the commercial and carry the load. Well, as we're walking through this construction site, this big, burly, gruff foreman, wearing a hard hat, he was like, what are you guys doing? And I said, we're walking to Dallas, kind of somewhat being a smart ass. And he goes, no, really. And I said, this young woman, is a widow, lost her husband in Iraq, and this young man's father, and we're walking in his honor, and so that they know that service and sacrifice is not forgotten. And you visibly, you could see this man's face change, and he went over and he gave Natalie, who was the widow, he gave Natalie a big hug and a big embrace, and we just kind of stopped down and they had this moment there. And for me, it was for everyone who was there, it was extremely powerful. But just to see that connection immediately happen, and to see what it meant to her and to Walker, and to see what it meant to this construction foreman, it was one of those memories that I'll always have, where you realize what you're doing and what we were trying to do with the national relay was something special.
It's a great story, Stephen, and thanks again for sharing. And, I know that between the two of you, I've had the pleasure of spending time hearing a lot of these stories over the years. And I think if we had 2 or 3 hours to give, we would do it all, because I've never had one of your stories that either Clint or you have told that hasn't impacted me and my family, just like your family, about making sure we are good citizens and being out that relay every year with you guys, either in Dallas or elsewhere. But one of the things we're trying to accomplish this year in this season of our podcast is, a lot of times people don't stop to ask when should they ask for help. And, for our audience, we've obviously spent a lot of time with our audience on business or healthcare pieces, but, every single person, there's a moment in time, especially when you're starting nonprofits, where you may have asked for help or you wish you would have. So when you're starting Carry the Load, maybe you could share, and I think you already had some nuggets in there, when you stopped and asked for help.
I would tell you that I think Stephen and I in some ways have been blessed by recognizing that as a requirement from maybe our earliest days at Annapolis. I mean, it's when you're trying to do something so hard you can't do it by yourself, it's more of a question of who do I ask for help than do I ask for help. And I think in our best versions of ourselves, we wade into things knowing we're going to have to pick teammates well. And I think for me, it became really simple when people were asking me, like, hey, can I do this with you? And I wanted to make sure I stewarded that interest and patriotism well. So for me, it was really quick going, hey, I don't want people to do what I want to do. I want to do what people want to do in a way that makes the mission matter. So I came out of the gate, when it became something bigger than just what I did on Memorial Day. I think the ball field and the battlefield teach you pretty quickly that both those things are bigger than you. And if you don't ask for help fast, you're not going to last very long on the ball field and the battlefield. So I feel like we were advantaged in a lot of ways to be used to doing things that are bigger than one person could do. And it being more, who do I ask for help than do I ask for help?
Stephen?
I don't think I can say much better than that. Going back to something I said earlier, very early on, there was a handful of individuals that Clint had been able to hoodwink or wrangle into this room. Some of them not. You hear Scott Roman tell it. He thought he was coming to a meeting to talk about an event that had some legs and was well underway. And it was after he'd been there for a few minutes, he realized that this was the initial meeting on this idea called Carry the Load. So
001, meeting 001.
But I think that it was important. The interesting thing about that is for those of you who don't know Clint, I always tell people that the best way for me to articulate and explain Clint Bruce is he's a great mix between a Texas high school football coach and a Southern Baptist preacher. He has the ability to motivate.
Stephen, I'm going to fact check you on that. Fact check true.
Yes. And so I say that to tell you, Clint, in sharing this story, had obviously touched a nerve and moved some emotions with some other people that felt called to help. And, the handful of people that were in that room, we never could have pulled off what we pulled off year one without their participation and without their their feedback and leadership on how we went about putting this together. So, to sum it up, going back to somewhat cliche, but in the SEAL community, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. There's merit to that, no matter what you're doing in life.
Yeah, and for your listeners, I'd add with that, in my experience, about the time I started asking myself, hey, should I ask for help? I'm probably already too late. I'm probably already behind the curve, right? By the time it's the pain is such that I'm going, maybe I need some help. And there were precursors to that pain that I should have paid attention to that give me signals like, hey, you need some help, man. And I've had hard conversations with guys who love me a lot, that, like Steven, who pointed out, like, hey, man, you may need some help and you don't know it. There's a difference between playing hurt, playing injured, and tough guys, whatever that is, we'll think we're playing hurt when we're actually injured. And so, some of that is self-awareness, and some of that is just running when people are going to tell you stuff. But in my experience, the rule is by the time I think I need some help, I've probably missed a couple signals. So creating a process that lets me know, and on the ball field and battlefield is easy just because those things are bigger than you anyway. The boardroom can be deceptive, and the boardroom you can lead yourself to think you know what's going on, and that's why organizations like yours and stuff like what Steven does now. Hey, I'm going to find a great place to build my business, or I'm going to ask someone like Steven and Stillwater, or I'm going to think I know the law, or I'm going to go out of the gate asking someone like you to help me avoid these paths. But as a rule, if you're wondering if you need help, I hope you're only a few hours late. It might be days or weeks.
That's awesome. And look, I'm going to let Michael have the last word, but I just want to thank you both. You guys have been big influences on my family, not even knowing it. But from that day when Steven talked to us about it, my kids know only one way to do Memorial Day because they were about the same age as yours, Steven. And to them, Memorial Day is carry the load. It is remembering those who paid that ultimate sacrifice. But for meeting Steven on that, I may not have ever known about carry the load. So I'm obscenely appreciative that you guys had this vision. And more importantly, you were willing to not make it about Steven running for 20 hours straight, because I know I definitely would not have done that either.
Yeah, out of the gate, that wasn't happening. I'm not running 20 hours in 10 minutes.
Well, I can put a bow on it. You started talking about you guys' skills of your gifts of being able to listen. And so whether it's who to ask for help or when to ask for help, I think that the listening has really enabled this nonprofit to be something that's grown where so many people are able to emotionally connect to it beyond, what Steven would have done, which is run for the entire time.
And he can actually talk. Like, he can carry on a normal conversation with you at like a 6-minute pace.
That's crazy.
Well, normally on runs, I'm thinking about, statute sarbanes on medical malpractice and things like that.
I do that on heavy leg days. On heavy leg days, I'm going, what is Sarbanes-Oxley, and how does that have implications on me as I decide whether or not to go public or raise capital?
Well, it's all fair play because Brad plays a military guy when he's at home and pretends like he's in battle
all the time. And the sad part is Steven has seen me with the pistol before and knows that I would lose badly.
That's just a function of who you're fighting. You'd be surprised if you can beat with a little bit of knowledge.
Well, again.
Yeah, we're so grateful that you guys joined us on Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. We're going to say goodbye, go into commercial, and on the other side, Brad and I will maybe touch on some of these hot topics that you guys think about when you're working out.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team. so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto. I'm still here with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
Wow, man, that was amazing to hear Stephen and Clint's story. It made the specials a little bit longer than normal, but I was just transfixed listening to them the entire time.
No, it was amazing. And hearing what they said and why they built it, it's fun to have been part of something for so long and see the growth that they've had. And
having walked it myself, that first time and connecting with the raw emotion of people who have served, walking to honor, people that have sacrificed, made the ultimate sacrifice for our country is just unbelievable. And it makes you truly view this holiday in a different way. And it's really cool to hear you talk about how your kids have kind of grown up knowing that. So as we kind of wrap up, Brad, our firm has been helping, kind of with the legal side of the growth of Carry the Load, and you have had an even, bigger individual role serving with Carry the Load. Talk a little bit about when they are starting doing these national relays and the types of implications that has just from a legal perspective.
Yeah, and hopefully for the audience who's not going to tune out when they hear this, it's important in any business, whether or not you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. When their vision got so big and they moved just outside of Texas, that meant they were actually doing business in several other states. And for a business entity, that means you have to do some foreign filing. As a nonprofit, it opened up great doors for fundraising, which was awesome, as you heard how much money they were raising. But it ran into that now you're, quote, present in that state fundraising. And not only do you have to let the state know you're there, there's a lot of filings that a nonprofit had to take on. So as we sat there as an organization and grew, we partnered with Carry the Load as a law firm and said, okay, we're going to walk with you physically and as best we can, gratis-wise, help you form these different entities or file the filings. And so there are a few people at our firm that are well-versed in all these different states and foreign filings with these nonprofit requirements and all the different registered agents you need to have, and the different secretary of states or comptrollers or treasuries groups that you have to file information from. So it was a great experience for Carry the Load to be able to do that. But as you grow your business, or in this case, your nonprofit, and you start stepping literally into other states, you need to be aware of the impact that can have on you in a legal perspective. So I don't know. After hearing their story, I almost feel bad even talking about the legal implications, Michael. And you said it too. But just as an organization, and by the way, for those listening, if you look in the episode notes, you will see the linkage to Carry the Load. So if you want to learn more about the organization, it's definitely an organization that we've been a part of for 9 years now. And so we're going into their 10th year and just been tickled that we've been able to participate and honored to help support this incredibly great organization.
Yeah, and I'll say, throughout this entire season, we've been talking about when to ask for help, and we're always saying basically sooner than the stories that we talk about. I loved Clint's cue.
No doubt.
That when you start asking yourself that question, a lot of times it may be that it's too late. And so to really start creating some discipline and some processes for your business on knowing when to ask for help and doing so before it's too late.
Yeah, he had some good takeaways there with the pain and understanding the difference from playing hurt versus being injured and understanding how that hurts you. So yeah, Clint dropped some good knowledge. Again, I don't know if that was the high school football coach or the Baptist preacher, but either way, I was spellbound by it.
It was awesome.
So, again, thanks again for joining us. And join us next Wednesday when we have another special, True Confessions of a Med Spa Owner. Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.